A former senior CIA officer tells Inside Story Americas why he thinks it's wrong to promote someone instrumental in the agency's use and cover-up of torture to be acting head of its clandestine service.
Someone who was one of the two people implicated in the execution of waterboarding, who actually signed off and pushed through the programs, I think sends the wrong message.
Plus an update on the expanding hunger strike at Guantanamo Bay. Just how bad are conditions at the prison camp? You're watching Inside Story Americas from Washington. Hello, I'm Shihab Rutansi. President Barack Obama's first day in office seems a long time ago. On that day, he declared that he would close the Guantanamo Bay prison camp. Some 4 years on, and the Pentagon has requested nearly $200 million more for infrastructure upgrades. A clear sign, if any were needed, that the facility is here to stay. However, prisoner anger and discontent at Guantanamo appears to be spreading. An increasing number of inmates are now on a desperate hunger strike, protesting at the lack of any prospect for release and increasingly invasive searches. All this as the CIA promotes to acting head of its clandestine service an officer who helped run the extraordinary rendition program that ferried kidnapped prisoners to Guantanamo, and who herself was once in charge of a black site where torture was used on inmates. She's also described as one of the main drivers of the destruction of more than 90 videotapes that documented the CIA's use of torture, tapes that the agency was legally bound to hand over for evidence at the 9/11 Commission and several court cases. But when such news is greeted with barely any of the protests seen during George W. Bush's presidency, is it a sign of the growing acceptance and institutionalization of U.S. human rights abuses and impunity? Glenn Carl is the CIA's former Deputy National Intelligence Officer for Transnational Threats. I asked him what his objections were to this latest personnel shift at the clandestine service.
I'm not sure I know her, and if I did, I couldn't say, of course, but the way her nomination was, or qualifications were described, were based on two things. One, the fact that she is a woman and that is for diversity a home run, and it may be, but diversity, as much as I support it also, is not a qualification for any job, really. Then, more importantly, someone who was one of the two people implicated in the execution of waterboarding and enhanced interrogation. Not someone simply involved in the process, as many were, as I was, but one of those who actually signed off and pushed through the programs, I think sends the wrong message when we should be repudiating these practices. These were, I hope, an aberration, not something that Americans should embrace. And in fact, my understanding is that the United States prosecuted Japanese soldiers who engaged in waterboarding after World War II.
So, but not only was she, we understand, then in charge of a black site where torture took place, but she was also one of the main drivers, it's thought, in the destruction of the videotapes documenting that torture, as far as we know. What does it say, though, then, that when we hear from anonymous CIA people, well, this is great for diversity, and yet they aren't focusing, perhaps, on how serious that record is?
I support what apparently is the administration's and certainly the CIA's desire, which is to turn the page, not to be bogged down in the past. I think one of the strengths of the United States actually is that we look forward and we don't engage in vengeance and account dealing, as it were. But in this instance, I think that it's unwise and harmful. It's not just unwise to put someone at a very senior position who was one of the key people involved in the programs themselves, not just implicated in the entire dynamic and process. So I think that is the issue, really, independent of what I'm sure are the fine merits of the officer otherwise.
But do you think those merits include a huge commitment to secrecy, given her wish to destroy all the evidence of torture in the black sites?
Well, I don't know if I'd go that far. Any CIA officer will be committed to secrecy. The issue of destroying the documents, my understanding is that the leadership of the CIA repeatedly, I think it was Jose Rodriguez, primarily this woman's immediate superior at the time, who pressed to have the videotapes destroyed, fearing that, and this is an understandable fear actually, that they would create the same sort of scandal and problem and revulsion that the photographs from Abu Ghraib did. So I understand the motivation, but if there had been an order not to destroy something because it then had already become part of a chain of evidence.
What we seem to have gleaned, though, is that she procured the legal guidance which gave her superior the legal authority to destroy them, at least in theory. I guess that. So again, that's kind of worrying about how we look at.
Well, that might overstate it. Yeah, that may overstate the authority. I wasn't directly involved and only have secondhand information on how that actually played out. But obtaining legal authority, I think, was constituted having made repeated requests to do something and then finding someone who was willing to say, well, okay. To me, that doesn't constitute the same thing as legal authority, when the legal guidance was pretty clear that if instructed not to maintain all information pertinent to a certain subject for legal reasons, that you must do so.
Right, no, I take your point. As far as accountability is concerned, though, has there been any? Has there been, again, perhaps clearly perhaps we won't expect any arrests or anything like that, but at least accountability within the service to ensure that those who made these sorts of decisions at least know what they did was wrong, and then there's not simply a direct ladder of promotion instead.
Yeah, I don't know that people were rewarded, although I expect that that is the case for having been involved in the programs. I'm not aware of any accountability in the sense that you're describing, as in punishment or sanction. I think the view of the institution and of the officers involved is that they were, as the CIA always is, assigned to do a very difficult job that went at least to the edge of what is authorized, and then that they should not be held accountable and take the fall for having done what their political masters order them to do. So I think that's the attitude, and to my knowledge, no one has been sanctioned, although that I might not be accurate on that. I do know, however, that there were several investigations because there were 1 or 2 deaths that have come out, and that's obviously a dramatic thing, and that went to the Department of Justice, I believe, that was involved after that.
But many of the same people who made the decisions post 9/11 to embark on the sort of actions that you've documented in your book and elsewhere, which, certainly malpractice, certainly criminality in some cases, are they still making decisions in the CIA? Are they still pretty high up? Do they still continue their promotion chances undimmed?
Although I understand the arguments that people need to be held accountable for breaking the law, I don't think people have been sanctioned, to my knowledge.
But what stops this from happening again?
Well, that's an important question, absolutely. President Obama's first executive order in his first day of office in his first term was essentially to repudiate the foundations of much of the ostensible war on terror, specifically to stop any and forbid any use of enhanced interrogation techniques by any American official. The CIA is a very rule-bound and law-abiding, paradoxical as that will sound in the context of this conversation, institution. And if the president orders something not be done, it will not be done. That is, I have confidence that that's the case. The issue, though, that you raise is very important. How can you stop this from happening again in an institution that, by definition, must act secretly? And I argue that, unfortunately, and it's a frightening thought even, the only protection we have, ultimately, since the laws did not suffice in this instance, as we saw, is the light of day, is speaking out so that the public knows about what our values are, and what our practices and regulations are, and what our behavior is. Otherwise, nothing will stop people from erring again.
Joining me now are Carlos Warner, attorney for 11 of the detainees at Guantanamo Bay and who was there just last month. And from New York, Jonathan Nuffel, an independent journalist who writes on justice issues for Rolling Stone magazine. John, first of all, that interview with Glenn Carl was interesting as an insight into how experienced agency staffers and officials think. He seemingly was conflicted between his loyalty to secrecy and the agency and the need for the rule of law. I mean, what did you make of it?
Well, I think that I would take a slightly harder line than Glenn took in that interview. I think that if you want to ensure that this kind of behavior doesn't happen again, you need to have prosecutions. And whether that's individual CIA officers, I'm not sure that that would necessarily be the best, but you need to have prosecutions of the high-level officials who sanctioned this behavior. And Obama's look forward, not backward mantra, his policy, from the first day, what that has done it not only ensures that lawlessness will happen again in the future, but it also gives it a kind of gleam of bipartisan support. And so it takes it out of the news, and Americans are pulled much more favorably about a lot of these issues because there were no prosecutions.
Even the destruction of evidence of torture. I mean, actually, perhaps, John, you can just fill us in with some of the background to that. This is key evidence repeatedly subpoenaed, and yet it was destroyed. How much do we know about what exactly happened?
Well, the ACLU has done a lot of work on this case. They attempted to find the CIA in contempt of court in 2005 after the tapes were destroyed. That attempt was unsuccessful, but a court had ordered the CIA to maintain these tapes. And beyond that, the 9/11 Commission had requested evidence of this kind. They were not either aware of the existence of the tapes or of their destruction. And that's the same for the two ranking members of the House Intelligence Committee at the time in 2005. They were completely in the dark about this kind of thing. So the history of these tapes, I think, is one that's completely shrouded in secrecy. And to the extent that we have heard Eric Holder's DOJ weigh in on it, when he didn't bring any charges, what he said at the end when he decided not to bring charges was that shouldn't be seen as an exoneration. He didn't elaborate on that, but I think that the legal standing of the destruction of these tapes is very, very much in question.
And as part of that ACLU litigation, an email was revealed from the deputy of Kyle Dusty Foger. He was then the executive director of the CIA, which said that Jose Rodriguez, who was the boss of the person who's just been promoted to acting head of clandestine services, that Jose Rodriguez thought, quote, the heat from destroying the tapes is nothing compared to what it would be if the tapes ever got into the public domain. He said that out of context, they would make us look terrible. It would be devastating to us, end quote. So I guess we've got the motivation at least then in the open then, John.
Yeah, Rodriguez, I think, has been relatively forthcoming about how disastrous these tapes could be if they had come to light, not only from a PR standpoint, but also they almost certainly included waterboarding, which is, under any reasonable definition, a form of torture. So I think that there was a lot of apprehension at CIA that these tapes clearly could be used as evidence to prosecute individual agents.
All right, so then, Carlos, in the meantime then, Jose Rodriguez, who was just mentioned there, his deputy has now been promoted to acting head of clandestine services. As far as these tapes are concerned and her actions, do they have much impact on some of the cases that you're representing at Guantanamo?
Well, first of all, yes. You know, I have a top secret security clearance. I represent one of the individuals in Camp 7. So I can't tell you if it does or doesn't apply. But what I will say is this. There was a court order. The court order was clear that they should not be destroyed. It's a preservation order. And this goes back to history here. It goes back to Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney, in the shadow of 9/11, said, do what we have to do. We have to go to the dark side. And these CIA officers were operating under that assumption. And that went right up to the point where they were destroying the tapes. Now, one other thing on the tapes. They wouldn't be secret anyway. Nobody sees the litigation that we do in federal court here in Washington. It's all behind closed doors. So the idea that they were going to somehow become public is preposterous. This is about the CIA destroying evidence and obstructing justice.
Did those tapes depict the torture of your clients?
Well, I can't confirm or deny whether or not they did. All I can say is that that was in contravention of a court order, and the CIA has proved to be lawless, above the law. And they did it just a few weeks ago in Guantanamo again.
What was that?
Well, they have a kangaroo court in Guantanamo, unfortunately, the military commissions, but they have a good judge who's in charge of that court. From all sides, the lawyers respect this judge. And he lost control of his courtroom because the CIA is controlling it. And then we had further hearings, and during those hearings, it was revealed that they were tapping our conversations, our attorney-client conversations, because they don't care about courts. They don't care about rights. They do not subscribe to the Constitution or anything else. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
But in all this time, as someone who deals with the CIA and its actions, have you ever, I mean, what does it take, do you think, then, for the CIA to think that someone has crossed the line, then?
Well, the CIA doesn't, I think your guest said that they're rule-bound. Well, that's preposterous. I mean, they're the least rule-bound organization that we have.
But perhaps the executive isn't actually perhaps making rules on some of these issues, but has perhaps made a rule on torture, I guess, is what we're supposed to be thought is.
From what we know, there's no enhanced interrogation techniques. They're still examining detainees. Now they're doing it on ships instead of at Guantanamo. We don't know exactly what's happening. The important point is this. They're talking about promoting somebody who is doing the worst of the worst for America. I mean, President Obama, when he vowed to close Guantanamo, talked very clearly about the fact that this weighs on his conscience. Well, he's promoting, or John Brennan's promoting, or thinking about promoting, someone who,
director,
who is probably has no conscience on this issue.
Has this caused much of a stir, John? I suppose it's also interesting to note that the only person at the CIA who has been prosecuted was the whistleblower who told us about the torture.
Well, and I think that's a really important point that Glenn brought up at the end of the interview there, that in his estimation, what will sort of rein the CIA in is information and transparency. And what we've seen under the Obama administration is a war on whistleblowers, and John Kiriakou going to jail is really a perfect example of that. And this is the acting director is somebody who's likely going to be promoted by John Brennan, who the first time Obama wanted to appoint him, there was such a groundswell of objection to that from the left that Obama passed on it. And now, not only was Brennan confirmed fairly easily, but it looks like he's going to promote somebody who is very, very much in charge, or was in charge, of the rendition, detention, and interrogation program.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what's happening to those who were rendered to Guantanamo. Carlos, you were there quite recently. We did a show in early March. David Reams, who's one of the lawyers, came on the show and told us about what was happening then in the face of military denials that anyone really was on hunger strike. He told us at the time all but 3 or 4 of some 130 inmates in Camp 6 were on hunger strike. What do you think the situation is now?
Well, the number is 130. They're not in Camp 6. They've been moved, shift back and forth from Camp 6 to Camp 5. But we know it's about 130 because as lawyers, we have all obviously reached out to our clients in an effort to figure out what's happening there. And we know that there's 2 individuals that are not hunger striking in Camp 6, and there's numerous others. I won't take you through all the numbers, but the bottom line is there's 130 out of 166 that are currently hunger striking. The military puts the number much lower. I'm not interested in arguing about the number. This is a hunger strike that is unprecedented in scope and duration.
At the time, it seemed the hunger strike was very much based on new leadership at the camp, who were returning to 2006 rules, very harsh rules of Guantanamo. But then, in recent weeks, even military officials, the head of the commander of U.S. Southern Command, are admitting that maybe this is more about actually the fact that there's no hope for them. What is the connection?
That's
this about?
The truth. We disagree with the military on many of the details here, and later on I'd like to tell you that they can end the strike today. But that being said, this is about President Obama. It's a difficult thing for me to say because I'm a person who believes and believed in President Obama, but he has no will, no desire to close Guantanamo, and the men sense that. They see it on television, they hear it from their lawyers, and they know even remember, out of the 166, 86 of them we all agree unanimously, including the CIA, all agree they should be released, but they're stuck there for life. And that's what's driving this forward. So they have very specific disputes with the current command. The relationship between the guards and the detainees goes back to the 2006 areas. But this is about hopelessness, and it's about President Obama.
So is there any hope then of ending the hunger strike in that case? Are there things that can be done?
Well, ending the hunger strike, there is hope, and the military has done it before. So we've told them on many occasions, we've told them behind closed doors, and we've told them out front, all you have to do is allow the men to voluntarily surrender the Quran. And all the clients have said, if you do that, we will start to eat again.
What do you mean voluntarily surrender?
They do not want to have the Quran under these circumstances, being searched not by the guards, but we understand by Muslim linguists. They don't want that. They feel that that's a violation, and they would prefer to turn their Quran voluntarily to the military instead of holding it. The military allowed this previously, is not allowing it now. They've dug in and they're playing chicken with these men, and somebody's going to die.
Has any reason been given there?
No reason. No reason. They said this. The military said, I believe 2 days ago, that it's not an acceptable solution. Well, it was acceptable 6 years ago, and it will get them eating again. Now, we agree with the military. That's not going to solve the problem. We have a lot of work to do to solve the problem, but it will solve my clients starving themselves to death. So we're imploring the military to allow this to happen.
John, what's been the military reaction to all this? At least they aren't. I mean, when we last did a show, they suggested only 7 inmates are on hunger strike. They have raised that number now, but is this getting much press as well in the U.S.?
Well, yeah, they keep raising the number as it sort of trickles out every couple days. Their acknowledgement goes a little bit higher, but as far as their general reaction has been almost literally identical to what their reaction was in 2006. Jason Leopold has a post at Truth Out that details in very heavy detail the statements from Pentagon spokespeople that they directly mirror themselves, first denying that it happens, then underplaying it. But just to add one point about this being at Obama's feet, Obama's administration has closed the office that is responsible for determining how to close Guantanamo Bay. And there are now, as was stated earlier, $200 million being requested by the Pentagon for renovation and expansion.
But does this seem to have worked then? How's the U.S. press kind of lost interest as a result then?
Oh, absolutely. I think that there is very, very little interest. There's also very little interest among the Democratic base. Obama's decision to keep Guantanamo Bay open last year polled at something like 70% among voters and 53% of Democrats.
Carlos, amidst this then, actually, and very quickly,
yes.
Actually, perhaps just give us an idea of the health condition of your clients.
Well, it's poor. I mean, I saw a man who, in the span of a month, I was there in February and then again in March, in the span of a month was down to 108 pounds, down 35 pounds in that time. And he couldn't stand. His cheeks were sunken. He looked like a man who was near death. Now, the military, and I don't want to fight with them again, but the military might not define that individual as a hunger striker because they accuse some of the men of sneaking trail mix, this sort of thing. What the military doesn't understand is that drives them deeper. It gives them more resolve.
So talking of resolve then, there is a symbol of resistance, a lantern actually, which I think we can put up in our big screen here. And this letter that was written to you by one of your clients, perhaps you can read it out to us,
Sure.
And help us understand what's going on in the minds of those who are hunger striking.
Well, this lantern was made by Fayez al-Kandari, and it was made with his brothers, and he wanted me to be clear about that. And this was dated 3/21/13. Dear Mr. Warner, I made this lantern with my brothers. It's made with bits of paper and cardboard. We used a water bottle sanded on the floor as glass. We painted it with bits of paint and fruit juice. It's held together by pressure only. We made this lantern for those in the world who remember and pray for us during this time of suffering. Let its light fill you. Use it to bring peace to your heart. Thank you. And it's signed by my client. And when he wrote that, I was emotional because I felt like that was perhaps a goodbye letter.
Carlos Warner, thank you very much.
Thank
John Nafel, thank you as well. That's it from the team in Washington, D.C. for now.